The July heat hung heavy in the air as I approached the Harper residence. The call had come in just hours before a friend of the family had discovered something unimaginable. We'd been warned that the scene was bad, but nothing could have prepared us for what waited inside. The house was eerily quiet as we entered, the kind of silence that feels unnatural. The first thing that struck me was the chaos. Drawers were pulled open, cabinets left ajar, and belongings were scattered across the floor. It looked like a robbery, but something didn't feel right. My gut told me this was more than a burglary gone wrong. We moved carefully through the home, taking in every detail. In the living room, the first body lay lifeless. Joni Harper, a young mother, had been shot multiple times. Blood pooled beneath her, staining the carpet. But it wasn't just the gunshots. She had been stabbed, the knife missing from the scene, but its cruel intent unmistakable. Nearby, we found the body of her mother, Ernestine Harper. She lay slumped near the hallway, another victim of the same cold brutality. Her presence here wasn't a surprise. She often stayed with Joni to help with the children. Now she was another casualty in a massacre that defied comprehension. The children were next. 4-year-old Marquez, 2-year-old Lindsay, and 6-week-old baby Marshall were found in their bedrooms. The sight of them stopped us in our tracks. Marquez and Lindsay had been shot at close range, their tiny bodies crumpled in positions that suggested no chance to react, no chance to escape. Baby Marshall lay in his crib, still and silent. It was a scene no investigator, no human being, should ever have to witness. The house was a puzzle, every detail another piece to a crime that felt deeply personal. The sliding glass door was slightly ajar, and while it seemed like the entry point, there were no signs of forced entry. No shattered glass, no broken locks. Whoever had entered this home had either been invited or had access. The chaos in the house raised more questions. Drawers and cabinets had been rifled through, but nothing of value seemed to be missing. Electronics, jewelry, cash, everything was still there. It was a contradiction that gnawed at me. If this wasn't a robbery, then what was it? We found more troubling details as the forensics team began their work. The knife used to stab Joni was from her own kitchen, taken from the butcher block and then removed from the scene. The precision of the attack, the choice to use something from the home, it all pointed to a killer who knew this family well. As the day wore on, neighbors gathered outside, their whispers filled with shock and speculation. Bakersfield was a quiet community, the kind of place where crimes like this didn't happen. Now, the sight of police cars and the somber procession of body bags was shattering that illusion. One name quickly rose to the surface: Vincent Brothers. He was Joni's estranged husband, the father of her children. Their relationship had been tumultuous, filled with separations, reconciliations, and unspoken tension. If anyone had a motive, it was him. But there was a problem. Vincent wasn't in Bakersfield. He'd flown to Ohio days earlier to visit his family, an alibi that seemed airtight. Still, we knew we couldn't take anything at face value. Alibis could be fabricated, and appearances could be deceiving. As we combed through the scene, I couldn't shake the feeling that this crime was driven by something deeper than greed. The violence was too personal, too precise. Whoever did this wasn't just trying to kill, they were trying to erase. By the time we left the house that evening, the sun was setting, casting long shadows over the quiet neighborhood. We had collected evidence, photographed every inch of the scene, but the weight of what we'd witnessed stayed with us. Back at the station, I stared at the photos of Joni and her children, their lives stolen in an act of unimaginable cruelty. Somewhere in the chaos of that house was the answer we needed. And as I prepared for the long investigation ahead, one thought burned in my mind: we wouldn't rest until we found justice for the Harper family. As the investigation deepened, the Harpers emerged as more than just victims. They were a family whose lives had touched so many, making the crime all the more devastating. Their history was not just a backdrop to the tragedy, but a reflection of the resilience and love they carried despite the struggles they faced. Joni Harper was a vibrant woman, full of life and energy. Born and raised in Bakersfield, she was the youngest of 5 children and the heart of her family. Joni's passion for basketball set her apart early on. She excelled in the sport throughout high school and beyond, earning recognition as an athlete and later as the first woman in Kern County to officiate boys' basketball games. Her love for the game was undeniable, but it was her dedication to her family and community that defined her. Joni's mother, Ernestine Harper, was a force to be reckoned with, a community activist with an unwavering commitment to justice. Her work took her far beyond Bakersfield, from local advocacy to international missionary efforts. Ernestine was the kind of person who left an impact wherever she went, and her values of compassion and fairness shaped Joni's worldview. The bond between mother and daughter was inseparable. When Joni became a mother herself, Ernestine was there every step of the way, moving into Joni's home to help care for her children. For the Harper family, church was more than just a weekly routine. It was a cornerstone of their lives. The Baker Street Church of Christ was a sanctuary for them, a place where they found strength, guidance, and a sense of belonging. Joni's children were her pride and joy. Marquez, just 4 years old, was a curious and playful boy, always eager to learn and explore. Lindsay, at 2, was spirited and full of laughter, a reflection of her mother's vibrant personality. Baby Marshall, only 6 weeks old, was the newest addition to the family, a fragile, innocent life caught in the storm of what was to come. But their world wasn't without its struggles. Vincent Brothers, Joni's estranged husband, was a complicated figure in her life. A respected vice principal at a local elementary school, he had the outward appearance of a dedicated educator and community leader. To those who didn't know him well, Vincent seemed like the perfect match for Joni, charming, ambitious, and successful. Yet, beneath the surface, their relationship was fraught with tension. Vincent's absences, infidelity, and controlling behavior eroded the trust between them. Their on-again, off-again relationship was a cycle of reconciliation and betrayal, one that Joni endured for the sake of her children. By the time their third child, Marshall, was born, the cracks in their relationship had deepened. Vincent had moved out, yet he remained a presence in their lives, hovering at the edges of the family he had helped create but never fully committed to. As we spoke to friends, neighbors, and church members, a picture of the Harper family began to emerge. They were deeply loved, admired for their resilience and kindness. Joni's devotion to her children and her determination to build a stable life for them, even in the face of hardship, was a recurring theme in every conversation. Ernestine's influence on her daughter and grandchildren was evident in every story we heard. She was a pillar of strength, a woman who had dedicated her life to helping others. Her presence in the Harper home wasn't just practical, it was a source of stability and love. The more we learned about the Harpers, the more incomprehensible the crime became. How could anyone target such a family? What could drive someone to such a level of hatred and violence? As we pieced together their lives, we found ourselves haunted by the stark contrast between who they were and the way their lives had ended. The Harpers had faced their share of challenges, but they had also created a home filled with love, laughter, and hope. It was that hope that made the tragedy so devastating. Joni had fought to give her children a brighter future. Ernestine had dedicated her life to making the world a better place, and their young children had barely begun to explore life's possibilities. Their story wasn't just one of loss, it was a reminder of the fragility of life and the darkness that can strike even the most resilient among us. And as we dug deeper into their past, one question grew louder: who could hate them enough to destroy everything they had built? The Harper house was like a puzzle thrown into chaos, with every piece scattered, and none fitting neatly together. As investigators, we've seen our share of crime scenes, but the Harper home was different. There was a cold calculation beneath the chaos, as though the killer had been meticulous in their violence, but deliberately careless in their staging. The initial survey of the scene left us with more questions than answers. Why was the house in disarray, yet untouched by robbery? Every drawer was pulled out, cabinets thrown open, but cash, jewelry, and electronics remained in place. It looked like a robbery on the surface, but there was something too neat, too performative about it. Whoever did this wasn't looking for valuables, they were covering their tracks. Then there were the bodies. Each one told a story, and none of them spoke of chance. Joni Harper lay in the living room, her wounds a grim testament to the killer's rage. The stab wounds inflicted with her own kitchen knife suggested a personal vendetta, a killer who wanted to hurt her specifically. Ernestine Harper was found in the hallway, her position indicating she may have been trying to protect her grandchildren. Each child, lifeless in their bedrooms, bore gunshot wounds at close range. The 6-week-old baby Marshall was still in his crib. The sight of such cold efficiency sent a chill through all of us. This wasn't random. This was someone who had planned every detail. The sliding glass door at the back of the house was slightly open, but there were no signs of forced entry. It suggested familiarity. The killer didn't need to force their way, and they were either let in or had access. This was someone close to the family. As we pieced through the evidence, one name surfaced repeatedly: Vincent Brothers. He He was Joni's estranged husband and the father of her children. Their on-again, off-again relationship was riddled with tension, infidelity, and accusations. Vincent had moved out of the house months earlier, but his shadow loomed large over the Harper home. However, Vincent had a seemingly perfect alibi. He wasn't even in Bakersfield when the murders occurred. On July 2nd, he had flown to Columbus, Ohio, to visit family. Records confirmed his flight, and his brother Melvin vouched for his presence in Ohio on the weekend of July 6th, when the murders took place. His alibi seemed rock solid, but something about it felt too convenient. When we located Vincent in North Carolina, he reacted to the news of the murders with what seemed like genuine shock. He wept openly, claimed he felt ill, and even asked for a trash can as if overcome with grief. To an outside observer, it would have looked like a man shattered by tragedy. But to us, it felt off. His emotions didn't feel organic, they felt rehearsed. To confirm his alibi, we began tracing his credit card activity. Transactions on July 6 placed him in Columbus, Ohio, suggesting he was miles away from the Harper home when the murders were committed. But surveillance footage from one of the stores cracked the facade. The man using Vincent's credit card wasn't him, it was his brother Melvin. Under questioning, Melvin initially denied using the card but eventually admitted Vincent had asked him to. His explanation: Vincent was in Ohio but didn't want to handle his own purchases. It was an odd excuse, and Melvin's nervous demeanor raised more suspicions than it quelled. The real breakthrough came when we examined the rental car Vincent had used during his trip to Ohio. The odometer reading revealed that the car had been driven over 5,400 miles, far more than what would be expected for someone staying locally. When we calculated the distance between Columbus and Bakersfield, the numbers added up. Forensic evidence sealed the theory. We partnered with the FBI to analyze the insects caught in the car's radiator. Several species were identified as being native to California and not Ohio. It was the final piece of the puzzle. The car had traveled to Bakersfield and back during the time frame of the murders. This discovery painted a chilling timeline. Vincent had flown to Ohio to establish an alibi. From there, he rented a car and drove cross-country to Bakersfield. He committed the murders, staged the house to look like a robbery, and then drove back to Ohio, using his brother to create a false trail with his credit card. As we dug deeper, Vincent's history came to light, and it was darker than we had imagined. 2 previous marriages had ended in allegations of abuse. One ex-wife claimed Vincent had threatened her life, and another had reported him for violent outbursts. A former co-worker accused him of harassment and assault, alleging he had stalked her and created a hostile work environment. Despite these accusations, Vincent's polished reputation as a school vice principal had shielded him from serious consequences. To his colleagues and the community, he was a dedicated educator and a role model. But beneath the surface, his history told a different story, a man who thrived on control, manipulation, and violence. The evidence was overwhelming, but the audacity of the crime left us grappling with one question: how could a man drive thousands of miles, murder his family in cold blood, and return as if nothing had happened? By the time we completed our investigation, every piece of evidence pointed to Vincent Brothers. The man who had once been a trusted figure in the community was now the primary suspect in one of Bakersfield's most heinous crimes. And as we prepared to make the arrest, the weight of the case settled over us. This wasn't just about justice for the Harper family, it was about uncovering the darkness that can hide behind the most familiar faces. The arrest of Vincent Brothers sent shockwaves through Bakersfield. A respected vice principal, a man trusted by parents and colleagues alike, now stood accused of orchestrating the brutal murders of his wife, mother-in-law, and 3 innocent children. But the trial ahead would be far from straightforward. Vincent's defense team came prepared, attacking every piece of evidence and painting a picture of a man falsely accused. They leaned heavily on his public persona, the dedicated educator, the charming professional, and cast doubt on the prosecution's theory. But as the trial unfolded, it became clear that this was no ordinary case. The prosecution began by laying out the timeline of the murders. They detailed how Vincent had flown to Columbus, Ohio, on July 2nd, setting up an alibi with his family. He rented a car and, under the guise of visiting relatives, drove thousands of miles back to Bakersfield. The odometer readings on the rental car and the insects found in its radiator provided damning evidence, tying Vincent to the cross-country journey. Each step of his plan was meticulously reconstructed. From the staged burglary at the Harper home to his return to Ohio, where he continued to bolster his alibi by using his brother to make credit card purchases. The evidence told a story of a man who had calculated every move, confident he could outsmart the system. Then came the forensic evidence, a cornerstone of the prosecution's case. The entomologist who had analyzed the bugs found in the car's radiator testified that several of the species were native only to California. This finding shattered the defense's argument that the car had been driven exclusively in Ohio. The sheer distance, driven over 5,400 miles, was also impossible to explain away. The prosecution highlighted Vincent's behavior in the days following the murders. Witnesses described how he showed no signs of grief or remorse, even as the community mourned the loss of the Harper family. Instead, Vincent appeared focused on practical matters, such as selling his belongings and listing his house for sale. To the prosecution, this was the behavior of a man preparing to flee. The trial also delved into Vincent's past, revealing a troubling history of violence and manipulation. His first marriage ended after he was convicted of spousal abuse, serving a brief jail sentence. His second wife alleged he had threatened to kill her, and co-workers came forward with stories of harassment and intimidation. While his professional image remained untarnished for years, his personal life painted a far darker picture. The defense, however, fought back fiercely. They argued that the prosecution's timeline was not just improbable but impossible. They brought in a representative from the car rental company, who testified that odometer readings weren't always accurate, casting doubt on the mileage evidence. Witnesses from Vincent's family were brought to the stand to vouch for his presence in Ohio during the weekend of the murders. His brother Melvin, despite being caught using Vincent's credit card, insisted that Vincent had been with him the entire time. The defense framed Melvin's cooperation with the prosecution as coerced, a desperate attempt to implicate Vincent without solid proof. Throughout the trial, Vincent maintained his innocence. When he took the stand, he spoke with conviction, denying any involvement in the murders. He portrayed himself as a loving father and husband, a man devastated by the loss of his family. His words struck a chord with some, but to others they rang hollow. The prosecution's closing arguments focused on the overarching question: who else would have committed such a calculated and personal crime? The staged burglary, the precision of the murders, and the careful alibi all pointed to someone who knew the victims intimately. There was no evidence of forced entry, no indication that a stranger had committed the crime. The jury deliberated for 3 days, weighing the mountain of circumstantial evidence against Vincent's unwavering proclamations of innocence. In the end, the pattern of lies, the carefully constructed alibi, and the undeniable presence of California insects in the rental car painted a picture they couldn't ignore. On January 17, 2007, the verdict was delivered, guilty on all counts. Vincent Brothers was convicted of the murders of Joni Harper, Ernestine Harper, and the 3 children Marquez, Lindsay, and baby Marshall. The sentence was swift and decisive. In September 2007, Vincent was sentenced to death, his actions deemed too heinous to warrant anything less. He was sent to San Quentin State Prison, where he remains on death row to this day. The trial had lasted 4 grueling months, with over 100 witnesses taking the stand. For the Harper family's loved ones, the verdict brought a measure of closure, but it could never undo the pain. The loss of Joni, Ernestine, and the children was an unfillable void, a haunting reminder of how one man's darkness could destroy so many lives. As the courtroom emptied and the case officially closed, the weight of the tragedy lingered. Bakersfield would never forget the Harper family, nor the chilling lengths Vincent Brothers had gone to in his attempt to erase them. For the investigators, the prosecutors, and the community, the trial wasn't just about justice, it was about ensuring that no one would ever forget the victims and the lessons their loss had taught us all. The trial of Vincent Brothers may have ended with a guilty verdict, but its echoes reverberated far beyond the courtroom. For Bakersfield, the Harper family massacre was a wound that refused to heal, a tragedy that challenged the community's sense of safety and trust. The legacy of the case, like the lives it extinguished, was complex and deeply personal. The Harper family had been pillars of their community. Joni was remembered as a loving mother and a trailblazer in Kern County's basketball scene. Her infectious smile and dedication to her children were recalled with reverence. Ernestine was celebrated for her activism and selflessness, a woman who had fought for justice not just locally but across the globe. The children Marquez, Lindsay, and baby Marshall were mourned as innocent lives stolen far too soon. Their loss created a void not just in their family, but in the broader community. The Baker Street Church of Christ, a cornerstone of the Harper family's lives, became a gathering place for collective mourning. Vigils were held, prayers were offered, and flowers were left at the church's steps as a symbol of the community's grief. For the investigators and prosecutors, the case was a haunting reminder of the darkness that could lurk behind a polished facade. Vincent Brothers had been a man of stature, a vice principal, a mentor to children, a figure of authority. But behind that image was a man capable of unimaginable violence. As we reflected on the case, questions remained. What drove Vincent to such extremes? Was it hatred for Joni, resentment of her independence, or an insatiable need for control? The murders were not impulsive, they were calculated, planned to the smallest detail. The insects in the rental car, the use of his brother to create an alibi, the staged burglary all pointed to a mind that was both cold and methodical. Vincent's history of violence offered some clues. His previous marriages had ended in allegations of abuse, threats, and manipulation. Former co-workers described him as intimidating and domineering. These patterns painted a picture of a man who thrived on control, and when he felt that control slipping away, he lashed out in the most extreme way possible. Yet, despite the evidence, some still doubted Vincent's guilt. His supporters, though few, argued that the case was built on circumstantial evidence. They questioned the reliability of the odometer readings and the forensic analysis of the insects. To them, the idea that a vice principal could drive across the country, murder his family, and return undetected seemed implausible. But for the Harper family's friends and loved ones, the verdict brought a measure of justice. They clung to the knowledge that Vincent had been held accountable for his actions, even if it couldn't undo the pain he had caused. In Bakersfield, the case left an indelible mark. Parents began looking more closely at those they trusted with their children. Community leaders called for greater awareness of domestic violence, urging neighbors and friends to speak up if they suspected abuse. Schools reviewed their policies for dealing with allegations against staff, determined to prevent another tragedy like this. The Harper family massacre also highlighted the fragility of perception. Vincent had cultivated an image of respectability, hiding his darker tendencies behind his role as an educator. It was a reminder that evil doesn't always announce itself, it can hide in plain sight, behind a smile, a handshake, or a reputation. For those of us who worked the case, it was impossible to forget the details: the charred insects in the radiator, the staged crime scene, the lifeless bodies of the children. The image of baby Marshall, still in his crib, stayed with me long after the investigation ended. It was a reminder of the innocence lost, the lives cut short by one man's monstrous actions. As Vincent sat on death row at San Quentin, awaiting his fate, the Harper family's legacy continued to inspire. Ernestine's activism, Joni's dedication to her children, and the joy of her young ones became symbols of resilience and love in the face of unspeakable tragedy. But the case also served as a cautionary tale. It was a reminder of the need for vigilance, for recognizing the signs of abuse and taking action before it's too late. The Harper family's story, though marked by heartbreak, carried a message. Even in the darkest moments, the pursuit of justice and the memory of those we've lost can light the way forward. Bakersfield may have moved on, but it will never forget the Harper family. Their names are etched into the city's history, a haunting chapter that serves as both a warning and a testament to the enduring fight for justice.